The 25 Most Amazing Paintings by Francisco de Goya. Number 25. The Snowfall, Winter. From the year 1786 to the year 1787. The work La Nevada, Winter, created between 1786 and 1787, is one of the tapestries designed by Francisco de Goya for the Royal Tapestry Factory in Madrid. This work, commissioned during the 18th century, captures the harshness of winter in an everyday scene that combines realism and artistic sensitivity. Goya employed a masterful technique to convey the rigor of the season, making use of muted colors, especially grays and whites, which dominate the composition. The attention to detail in the facial expressions of the peasants and the folds of their clothing convey the cold and the difficulties faced by the working classes of the time. In its historical context, this work reflects the efforts of Charles III to improve the quality of life and visual culture in Spain, as tapestries decorated royal palaces and had a functional and aesthetic purpose. Goya stood out for his ability to depict not only picturesque scenes, but also to capture human emotions in ordinary situations. In this case, the peasants' efforts to cross a snowy road become a symbol of resistance and unity in the face of adversity. Technically, the composition stands out for its use of chiaroscuro to accentuate the winter atmosphere. The loose brushstrokes and diffuse contours suggest a snow-covered landscape, while the human figures, although central, are harmoniously integrated into the natural environment. This balance between detail and abstraction marks an important step in Goya's evolution towards a more personal and expressive style. As a whole, the Snowfall, El Invierno, is a testament to Goya's talent for transforming official commissions into works that transcend their original function. An interesting detail is how the snow, depicted here in somber tones, contrasts with the brighter, more festive scenes of other tapestries, revealing the painter's versatility in themes and moods. Number 24. The Walk of Andalusia, 1777. The Walk of Andalusia, completed in 1777, is one of the tapestry cartoons produced by Francisco de Goya during the 18th century. In this work, Goya depicts a dynamic and joyful country scene, showing a group of young people enjoying a sunny day in a bucolic setting. The bright colors and flowing lines reflect the influence of Rococo painting, which was predominant at the time, but also show the first signs of the more direct and realistic approach that would characterize Goya in later years. Historically, this work is set in a period of change in Spain, where the cultural modernization promoted by Charles III sought to unify art and everyday life. Goya captured this spirit, providing an idealized but accessible vision of popular customs. The figures, dressed in traditional Andalusian costumes, convey a sense of regional identity that resonated with both the nobility and the common people. In technical terms, Goya used brilliant chromaticism, with greens, yellows, and blues dominating the palette. The perspective is carefully constructed to direct attention to the main group, but the background, with distant mountains and trees, provides depth and visual richness. This balance between narrative details and overall composition reinforces the impression of a spontaneous and vibrant scene. A particularity of this work is its ability to capture the essence of a fleeting moment with impressive naturalness. In The Walk of Andalusia, Goya demonstrates how tapestries could be both decorative and cultural documents of an era, reflecting the traditions and spirit of a region in a time of transformation. Number 23. The Puppet, from 1791 to 1792. The Pelele, created between 1791 and 1792, is one of the most recognized works of Francisco de Goya's tapestry cartoons. It represents a joyful and dynamic scene where a group of women are having fun tossing a straw doll into the air over a blanket. This composition stands out for its playful character and for the way in which Goya combines popular tradition with a critical sense that underlies many of his works. Contextually, this work is set in a period of transition towards the 19th century, when popular customs and traditions began to be integrated into high-level artistic production. Although apparently light and festive, El Pelele can be interpreted as a reflection on human relationships, with the doll representing a figure of mockery or social criticism, depending on the viewer's interpretation. Technically, Goya excels in his depiction of movement. The figures are positioned to suggest a dynamic circle, while the doll appears to float lightly, creating a sense of suspension. The predominantly warm colors and the facial expressions of the women add liveliness and humor to the scene. The significance of El Pelele lies in how Goya managed to capture a popular tradition with a style that combines the pictorial and the narrative. This tapestry cartoon not only decorated royal spaces, but also offered a unique look at the traditions and psychology of its time, making it a testimony of everyday life and its transformation into art. Number 22. The Wedding. From 1791 to 1792. The Wedding, painted between 1791 and 1792, is a vibrant portrait of 18th-century Spanish society, captured in a moment of celebration. Francisco de Goya presents a scene packed with characters, from the bride and groom to the guests, all gathered in front of a church for a wedding ceremony. Through this cartoon, Goya captured the social diversity of the time, from the ostentation of the rich to the humility of the poor. The historical context of this work reflects the social hierarchy and traditions that marked Spanish life at the end of the 18th century. In the scene, the contrasts between the characters' clothing and attitudes reinforce the message of social inequality, while the festive atmosphere softens it with a layer of optimism and unity. Artistically, The Wedding is a masterpiece of composition and detail. Goya used a rich palette of gold, red, and brown tones, which bring warmth and harmony to the scene. The expressions and postures of the characters are carefully crafted to tell multiple stories within a single image, turning the painting into a mosaic of human emotions. In this work, Goya once again demonstrates his ability to transform everyday scenes into meaningful works of art. The Wedding not only decorates, but invites the viewer to reflect on the social dynamics and rituals that make up the life of a community. Number 21. The Parasol. 1777. The Parasol, created in 1777, is one of Francisco de Goya's most iconic works within his series of tapestry cartoons. This piece portrays an elegant young woman seated while a man, possibly her lover, holds a parasol to protect her from the sun. The scene is an ode to fashion and the romantic ideal of the 18th century, rendered with exquisite attention to detail and a charm that reflects the Rococo style. The historical context of the parasol places it at a time when the aristocracy was looking for art that reflected an idealized and pleasurable life. This cartoon, intended to decorate a royal space, served that purpose by evoking a feeling of lightness and bucolic beauty. However, Goya added his distinctive touch, creating characters who seem to have a more complex inner life than the surface suggests. Technically, the work stands out for its handling of color and light. The bright tones of the costumes contrast with the natural background, and the parasol itself serves as a focal point that unifies the composition. The delicate brushstrokes and the calm expression of the young woman suggest an atmosphere of serenity and enjoyment. With the parasol, Goya consolidated his reputation as a master capable of elevating the simplest of subjects to an exceptional artistic level. This cartoon not only served as decoration, but also as a testament to the painter's ability to capture the spirit of his time in a seemingly simple yet deeply evocative image. Number 20. The Kite. From 1777 to 1778. Created between 1777 and 1778 AD, The Kite is a masterpiece that exemplifies the transition of art towards a more intimate and everyday approach, characteristic of Francisco de Goya. In the historical context of the 18th century, Spain was experiencing a cultural flourishing, with the Enlightenment influencing artistic thought and expression. Goya, who was already establishing himself as an undisputed master, used this work to capture a playful scene that reflects the spirit of his time, while demonstrating his exceptional technical mastery and his sensitivity to the small details of everyday life. The composition features a group of figures playing with a kite in a rural setting. Goya uses a warm color palette that evokes the serenity of nature, highlighting his skill in working with earth tones and soft blues. The figures are arranged in a way that guides the eye toward the sky, where the kite floats, symbolizing freedom and hope. The dynamism of the postures and facial expressions conveys a sense of movement, vitality, and connection between the characters. This approach humanizes the scene, giving it a sense of authenticity that is distinctive to Goya's early work. Technically, Goya's loose brushwork was already beginning to distinguish itself from his contemporaries, who favored more polished finishes. His handling of light and shadow gives the scene depth, while the slightly diffuse atmosphere anticipates the more expressive style that would characterize his later works. This painting also highlights Goya's ability to capture anecdotal details, such as the children's clothing and the landscape, which add a narrative layer to the scene. The Kite is not only a celebration of rural life, but also a reflection on the small joys that transcend time. Interestingly, this work is part of a series of cartoons for tapestries destined for the royal palace of El Pardo, which underlines its importance in Goya's artistic development. Number 19. Blind Man's Buff. 1788. Blind Man's Buff, created in 1788 AD, is an iconic work that showcases Goya's mastery in capturing moments of everyday life with a level of detail and emotion that few artists of his time were able to achieve. In the 18th century, Spain was immersed in a process of social and cultural change, and Goya positioned himself as a visual chronicler of this transformation. Conceived as a tapestry cartoon, this work stands out for its vibrant composition and its depiction of a popular game, becoming a visual testimony to Spanish folklore and traditions. The scene shows a group of young people playing Blind Man's Buff, a traditional game that symbolizes both innocence and collective pleasure. Goya uses bright colors and soft lighting to convey an atmosphere of joy and camaraderie. The figures are carefully arranged in a space that, although simple, reflects an idealized natural environment. The circular arrangement of the characters directs the viewer's attention to the center of the action, where one of the players, blindfolded, tries to catch the others. Goya's painting style in this work combines precision and spontaneity. The dynamic brushwork and nuances of light and shadow add a sense of movement, while the details of the characters' clothing and faces show his ability to portray individuality and emotion. In addition, the slightly elevated perspective allows the viewer to feel like a privileged observer of the scene. This work not only has aesthetic value, but also documents an essential part of 18th century Spanish popular culture. It is worth noting that Blind Man's Hen is considered one of the most representative pieces of the tapestry cartoons commissioned by the Royal Tapestry Factory of Santa Barbara. Number 18. The Grape Harvest, Autumn. from the year 1786 to the year 1787. The Harvest, Autumn, painted between 1786 and 1787 AD, is a work that celebrates the connection between humans and nature through an idealized representation of the harvest. In the 18th century, this theme was deeply rooted in European artistic tradition, but Goya approaches it with a freshness and warmth that distinguish him. This cartoon for tapestries destined for the royal palace combines the symbolism of autumn with a personal approach that elevates the everyday scene to a unique artistic dimension. The painting shows a group of peasants harvesting grapes, with a vineyard and a clear sky as a backdrop. The composition is carefully balanced, with the main figures in the foreground and a landscape stretching out towards the horizon. The warm colors, dominated by ochres, golds and greens, evoke the richness of the autumn season, while soft light bathes the scene, creating a serene and contemplative atmosphere. Goya's technique in this work demonstrates his ability to capture the interaction between the figures and their surroundings. The natural gestures and facial expressions convey a sense of calm joy, reflecting both the effort and enjoyment of the harvest. In addition, the attention to detail in the elements of the landscape and the texture of the clothing adds a layer of realism that enriches the visual narrative. The harvest is more than a representation of rural life. It is a tribute to human labor and the beauty of nature. This cartoon falls during a period when Goya was consolidating his position as a court painter, and his success with these works marked a milestone in his artistic career. Number 17. The Duchess of Alba in Black. 1797. In 1797 AD, Francisco de Goya painted the Duchess of Alba in black, a work that captures not only the elegance of its sitter but also the psychological depth that characterized the most important portraits of the 18th century. By this time, Goya was an established painter, and as a portraitist he showed a particular interest in revealing the character and personality of his subjects. The Duchess of Alba, one of the most enigmatic figures of her time, became the focus of one of his most celebrated and controversial portraits. The painting shows the Duchess dressed in black, standing in a desolate landscape that contrasts with the vitality of her posture and expression. The choice of black as the main color symbolizes both mourning and sobriety, while the details in her clothing reflect her status and sophistication. The Duchess's direct gaze, charged with pride and defiance, establishes an immediate connection with the viewer, while the inscription, "Only Goya," in the sand adds an element of mystery and possible intimacy between the artist and his model. Technically, this work stands out for its fluid brushwork and subtle modulation of dark tones to create volume and texture. Goya demonstrates his mastery in balancing the simplicity of the composition with the emotional complexity of the portrait. The details of the face and hands are especially notable, as they convey both the nobility and humanity of the Duchess. The Duchess of Alba in Black remains one of Goya's most analyzed works, not only for its artistic value, but also for the stories surrounding its creation. Number 16. The Countess of Chinchin. 1800. The Countess of Chinchin, painted in 1800 AD, is one of Francisco de Goya's most outstanding portraits. In the context of the 19th century, this work reflects Goya's evolution towards a more introspective and emotional style, focusing on the psychological representation of his subjects. The Countess, Maria Teresa de Borbón de Villabriga, appears as a symbol of the delicacy and refinement of her era, while the portrait itself reveals the tensions and complexities of the Spanish court. The portrait shows the Countess seated, dressed in an elegant light-colored dress that contrasts with the dark background. Her expression is serene but melancholic, conveying a sense of introspection and vulnerability. The composition, simple but deeply effective, stands out for its balance between the main figure and the carefully crafted details, such as the textures of the fabrics and the ornaments. Goya uses a soft palette and subdued lighting to create an effect of delicacy, while his fluid, expressive brushwork adds dynamism to the work. The attention to detail in the Countess's hands and face shows the artist's ability to capture both the physicality and the emotional essence of his subjects. This portrait is also distinguished by its intimate atmosphere, suggesting a personal connection between the painter and his subject. The Countess of Chinchin is a perfect example of how Goya combined the tradition of court portraiture with a more modern and expressive approach. Acclaimed both in its time and today, the work is considered a testament to Goya's genius and his ability to transcend the artistic conventions of his time. Number 15. The Burial of the Sardine. From 1812 to 1819. Set in the years of political upheaval that characterized the beginning of the 19th century, The Burial of the Sardine is a work in which Francisco de Goya masterfully addresses the ambiguity of celebration and satire. This painting, developed between 1812 and 1819, shows a popular festival that evokes the carnivals of Madrid, where the ritual of the burial of the sardine marked the end of the celebrations. However, beyond the festive, Goya introduces dark elements that suggest a critical view of the social customs of his time. Technically, the work stands out for its bold use of loose brushstrokes and a palette of bright but restrained colors, which contrast with the caricatured faces of the characters. These figures, mostly masked, reinforce the carnivalesque yet disturbing atmosphere. Goya employs a dynamic composition, with the central group arranged in a semicircle, as if rotating around an invisible axis, generating a sense of movement. The texture of the oil reflects his mature technique, with strokes that suggest details without needing to define them completely. In the context of Goya's career, this painting represents his ability to capture the essence of the popular without neglecting the complexity of human feelings. It is set in a time when Spain was facing profound social and political transformations, something that Goya reflected in his works with a mixture of irony and denunciation. His ability to portray the grotesque and the sublime at the same time consolidated his reputation as one of the greatest visual chroniclers of his time. A curious detail is how, beneath the apparent festive chaos, one can interpret a criticism of the moral emptiness of a society more interested in spectacle than in substance. This duality between celebration and decadence remains one of the most fascinating aspects of the work. Number 14. The Meadow of San Isidro. 1788. The Meadow of San Isidro, painted in 1788, is an iconic work that captures everyday life in 18th century Madrid. Depicting the crowds gathering on the banks of the Manzanares River to celebrate the feast of San Isidro, the city's patron saint, this painting is a testament to Goya's mastery of depicting popular scenes. The painting captures the vibrant, luminous atmosphere of a day of celebration, with a crowd stretching out toward the horizon under a clear sky. Goya's technique in this work is delicate and detailed, using warm tones and careful brushstrokes to bring the crowd to life. Each figure seems to be part of an organic whole, demonstrating his mastery in capturing both collective character and individual nuances. Spatial depth is achieved through a composition that guides the eye toward the river, while dynamism is maintained through the movement of the figures. Historically, this painting is set at a time when Goya was beginning to establish himself as a portraitist and chronicler of his time. It represents his ability to balance an interest in the everyday with an artistic sensitivity that transcends the merely descriptive. This work is a precursor to his later, darker and more critical works, but it already hints at the social concern that defines much of his production. A fascinating aspect of the Meadow of San Isidro is how Goya manages to capture not only a specific scene, but also the spirit of an era. This painting, while seemingly festive, can be interpreted as a symbol of the underlying tensions in a society on the verge of momentous changes. Number 13. The Pilgrimage of San Isidro, of the Black Paintings. From 1819 to 1823. The Pilgrimage of San Isidro, painted between 1819 and 1823, is part of the famous Black Paintings, a series of works that represent the apex of introspection and darkness in Goya's work. In this painting, the artist returns to the feast of San Isidro, but from a completely different perspective than the one he had shown in The Meadow of San Isidro. Here, the atmosphere is somber, with deformed figures and expressions that convey anguish and despair, rather than joy. The technique used in this work is radically different from his previous works. Goya uses dark tones and a limited palette, dominated by blacks, browns, and grays, with thick, gestural brushstrokes that give the scene a disturbing energy. The composition is chaotic, with characters who seem to get lost in a desolate landscape, accentuating the feeling of isolation and alienation. This work reflects Goya's own state of mind in his later years, marked by illness, deafness, and disillusionment with society. Through The Pilgrimage of San Isidro, Goya not only expresses a social critique, but also a portrait of the human condition in its darkest aspect. It is a piece that challenges the traditional view of the holiday, transforming it into a nightmare scenario. An intriguing detail is how Goya turns a scene that should be a celebration into an allegory of moral and spiritual decadence. This duality between the festive and the sinister is a constant in the Black Paintings, consolidating them as one of the most striking series in the history of art. Number 12. The Colossus. From 1808 to 1812. The Colossus, painted between 1808 and 1812, is one of Francisco de Goya's most enigmatic and talked about works. This imposing painting reflects the chaos and uncertainty of Spain during the Napoleonic invasion, represented through the figure of a giant dominating the landscape. The interpretation of this work has been the subject of debate, but it is commonly associated with the resistance of the Spanish people against the invading forces. In technical terms, the work is notable for its dramatic use of scale, with the figure of the Colossus contrasting against a tiny landscape of panicked villages and crowds. Goya employs a dark palette, with tones that emphasize the atmosphere of oppression and terror. The brushstrokes, though seemingly loose, are charged with intention, bringing movement and drama to the scene. In the context of his career, the Colossus is an example of Goya's engagement with the historical events of his time. Although in other works he addresses similar themes more explicitly, here he opts for an allegorical representation that amplifies the emotional impact of the work. The figure of the Colossus can be interpreted as a personification of war, strength, or even hope. An interesting detail of the painting is how Goya manages to simultaneously capture monumentality and fragility, reflecting the duality of a people who, although small compared to the giant of war, do not give up in the face of adversity. Number 11. The Bordeaux Milkmaid, from 1825 to 1827. In the last years of his life, Goya created The Milkmaid of Bordeaux, a work that, although seemingly simple, is one of the most moving and revealing of his career. Painted between 1825 and 1827, this portrait of a young milkmaid is an example of the freer and more experimental style that characterized his final period in Bordeaux. In contrast to the dark tones of his earlier works, this painting shines with soft colors and a light that radiates serenity. Goya's technique in this work is remarkably fluid, with light brushstrokes that suggest rather than define. The figure of the milkmaid, although central, is integrated into a blurred background that reinforces its ethereal air. The palette, dominated by pastel tones, contrasts with the emotional intensity of the black paintings, revealing a more hopeful and peaceful side to his art. In historical terms, the Milkmaid of Bordeaux represents a symbolic end to Goya's career. Far from the turmoil of Spain, in his exile in France, the artist seems to find in this work a form of reconciliation with life. Despite his advanced age and deteriorating health, Goya here demonstrates an artistic freshness that challenges the conventions of the time. A fascinating detail about this work is how, through its simplicity, Goya manages to convey an emotional complexity that resonates with the viewer. The Milkmaid of Bordeaux is not only a portrait, but also a testament to the indomitable spirit of an artist who continued to explore until the end of his life. Number 10. The Sabbath of the Black Paintings. From the year 1819 to the year 1823. The Witches' Sabbath is part of the group known as the Black Paintings, created by Francisco de Goya between 1819 and 1823 in the Quinta del Sordo. This period corresponds to the 19th century after Christ and is marked by a social context of intense political and cultural changes in Spain, influenced by absolutism and post-Napoleonic conflicts. The work reflects a gloomy and oppressive atmosphere, the result of the fears and sorrows of its creator, who captured in it the hopelessness and darkness of his time. The technique used in this painting is oil on plaster, later transferred to canvas. The style, characteristic of the black paintings, is raw and expressive, with vigorous brushstrokes and a palette dominated by dark tones, such as browns, blacks, and ochres. In The Witches' Sabbath, Goya depicts a satirical and macabre scene of witchcraft, where a goat, the emblem of the devil, presides over a witch's Sabbath surrounded by grotesque human figures. The deformed faces and exaggerated postures capture the superstition and fear that surrounded the practice of witchcraft at that time. In Goya's career, this work stands out as a manifesto of his most personal and introspective vision. As it was not intended for the public, Goya allowed himself unusual creative freedom, exploring the darkest corners of his imagination. Critics consider this painting a precursor to Expressionism and Surrealism, movements that would gain strength more than a century later. A fascinating fact is how this work, along with the other black paintings, remained ignored for decades after the painter's death. It was in the 20th century that they began to be valued as a testimony ahead of their time, full of symbolism and criticism of the irrational beliefs of their society. Number 9. Clubbing of the Black Paintings. From 1819 to 1823. In Duel with Cudgels, Francisco de Goya presents a striking and deeply disturbing scene that is part of the Black Paintings. This painting was created between 1819 and 1823, in the middle of the 19th century, after Christ, during the last years of the artist's life. The work is set in a historical context where Spain faced internal divisions and a climate of political uncertainty following the Napoleonic invasion and the return of absolutism. Goya channeled this social chaos through images charged with violence and unrest. The painting, done in oil on plaster and later transferred to canvas, shows two men engaged in a fierce fight, buried up to their knees in the ground, with clubs as weapons. The almost theatrical composition emphasizes the brutality of the scene, while the dark palette and dense brushstrokes reinforce the atmosphere of desolation. The tense faces and postures of the combatants convey a sense of immediacy, almost as if the viewer were an involuntary witness to this tragedy. In Goya's artistic panorama, this work symbolizes the fratricidal struggle that characterized Spain during his time. Beyond its aesthetic value, Duel with Cudgels is a scathing commentary on the irrationality of human conflicts, reflecting the political and social divisions that tore the country apart. A remarkable curiosity is how this work, conceived as a private decoration, has transcended the centuries to become an icon of universal art. Its crudeness and timeless message still resonate today as a warning against violence and hatred. Number 8. Half-Sunken Dog, from the Black Paintings. From the year 1819 to the year 1823. Half-Sunken Dog, one of Francisco de Goya's most enigmatic compositions, was created between 1819 and 1823, in the 19th century after Christ. This work is part of the Black Paintings, made in the privacy of the Quinta del Sordo, in a context of increasing isolation and illness of the artist. Spain at the time was marked by an oppressive environment, with internal conflicts and a society that transitioned between superstition and modernity. The painting, in oil on plaster, stands out for its minimalist composition. A precursor to modern art, Pero Semihindido anticipates currents such as surrealism and abstract expressionism. Its ability to evoke deep emotions through such an austere visual language has been a source of admiration and analysis for centuries. A fascinating fact is how this work, despite its apparent simplicity, has inspired generations of artists, becoming a symbol of the existential struggle of human beings in the face of the unknown. Number 7. The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters, Caprico number 43. From the year 1797 to the year 1799. The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters is one of the most iconic prints by Francisco de Goya, created between 1797 and 1799, in the 18th century after Christ. This work belongs to the series of engravings known as Los Caprichos, where the artist addresses with irony and crudeness the ills of the Spanish society of his time, including superstition, ignorance, and corruption. In an Enlightenment context, Goya positions himself as a scathing critic of traditional structures. The technique used in this work is etching and aquatint, which allows for a remarkable contrast between light and shadow. In the image, a man sleeps with his head on his arms, while grotesque creatures, such as bats and owls, emerge from the shadows, symbolizing the monsters that are born when reason is abandoned. The composition is a reflection of the conflict between enlightened rationality and the dark superstitious habits of the 18th century. This work is crucial in Goya's career, as it marks his transition towards a more introspective and committed art. With it, the artist not only denounced the vices of his time, but also anticipated the concerns that would dominate Romanticism. An intriguing detail is how this engraving has been interpreted as a universal warning about the consequences of ignoring reason, a message that remains relevant in contemporary contexts. Number 6. On May 2, 1808 in Madrid, The Charge of the Mamelukes. 1814. The 2nd of May 1808 in Madrid, also known as The Charge of the Mamelukes, is one of Francisco de Goya's most iconic works, painted in 1814, in the 19th century after Christ. This painting commemorates the uprising of the people of Madrid against Napoleonic troops, a key event in the Spanish War of Independence. In a context of resistance and patriotism, Goya created this work as a visual testimony to the bravery and suffering of his nation. The painting, executed in oil on canvas, is monumental in both size and impact. Goya uses a dynamic composition and a vibrant palette to capture the chaos and brutality of battle. The figure's dramatic gestures and energetic brushstrokes convey a sense of movement and urgency. The Mamelukes, mercenaries in Napoleon's service, appear as exotic figures, accentuating the contrast between invaders and patriots. In Goya's career, this work stands as an example of his ability to combine art and historical chronicle. Its focus on human suffering and violence set a precedent for the modern representation of war in art. A notable fact is how this work, along with the 3rd of May 1808, consolidated Goya as one of the greatest visual chroniclers of his time, transforming historical episodes into images of profound emotional and universal impact. Number 5. The Family of Charles IV. From 1800 to 1801. Against the backdrop of a Spain profoundly transformed by the ideas of the Enlightenment and the impact of the brewing Napoleonic Wars, Francisco de Goya created a masterpiece that captures the pomp and contradictions of the Spanish monarchy at the beginning of the 19th century. The Family of Charles IV is a group portrait that brings together members of the royal family in a composition that, at first glance, exalts their authority and splendor. However, Goya's penetrating artistic eye reveals darker nuances. The characters, depicted with an unflattering sincerity, reflect the emotional and political complexity of the moment. Goya employs a style marked by unwavering realism. The textures of the fabrics, the meticulousness of the jewelry, and the precision of the faces highlight his technical mastery. However, what truly elevates this painting is its ability to transcend mere physical representation. Through the arrangement of the figures and their expressions, Goya hints at the internal tensions within the royal family, such as the lack of cohesion and the challenges inherent in leadership in uncertain times. The figure of Charles IV, despite occupying the center of the composition, lacks the dominant presence typical of monarchs in royal portraits, while Maria Luisa of Parma seems to exert a more visible influence, suggesting her role as de facto leader. This work marks a high point in Goya's career as a court painter. Beyond technical skill, it shows his courage in depicting the powerful with an honesty bordering on satire, a rarity in an artistic environment dominated by flattering praise. The painting also reveals his fascination with exploring the human condition in all its facets, even within the confines of absolute power. A fascinating detail is the discreet inclusion of Goya himself in the background, working on his canvas. This gesture not only reaffirms his place in the artistic scene of his time, but also suggests his role as a critical witness of a turbulent era. Number 4. The Clothed Maja. From 1800 to 1807. At the height of his career, Francisco de Goya challenged social and artistic norms with The Clothed Maja, a painting that, along with its nude counterpart, redefined female portraiture in 19th century European art. Created in a Spain where decorum and morality dictated the boundaries of art, this work breaks new ground by presenting a female figure who, though covered in delicate fabrics, radiates a palpable sensuality. Goya opts for a relaxed posture and a direct gaze that immediately connects the viewer with the model, giving her a presence that goes beyond the physical. The soft, well-defined fabrics, with a chromatic range that combines warm and cold tones, highlight the painter's technical skill, while the loose, lively brushstrokes add dynamism to the neutral background. Despite being clothed, the Maja maintains an air of mystery and boldness, which sets her apart from traditional portraits of women of the time, generally confined to more conservative roles. This work is considered an inseparable complement to La Maja Desnuda, but not only because of the obvious contrast between the two. Together, they explore the boundaries between the public and the private, the acceptable and the forbidden, raising questions about the perception of the female body and identity in a deeply patriarchal society. The cultural and artistic impact of this painting cannot be underestimated. Although the identities of the sitter and the commissioner remain a matter of speculation, the fact that Goya executed it in secret adds a layer of intrigue that continues to fascinate critics and viewers. Number 3. The Naked Maha. From 1795 to 1800, Francisco de Goya challenged the established norms of his time with The Naked Maha, a work that stands out for both its thematic boldness and its artistic excellence. Created in a cultural context where the depiction of the nude female body was strictly regulated, this painting broke new ground by presenting a female figure that not only lacks any trace of classical idealization, but is also fully aware of her sensuality. Goya takes an innovative approach to the pose of the model, who lies reclining on a divan with an expression that mixes curiosity and defiance. The absence of mythological or allegorical elements, common in nudes of the time, reinforces the human and earthly character of the work. The warm color palette and soft brushstrokes create a texture that evokes realism, while the use of subtle shadows gives depth and volume to the model's body. This painting marked a milestone in Goya's career, even bringing him into conflict with the Inquisition, which considered the work a challenge to the morality of the time. Its relevance lies in how it combines masterful technique with a cultural statement, the autonomy and strength of the female body as a subject, not just as an object. An intriguing aspect is how The Naked Maha anticipates modernism and its ability to provoke diverse emotions and reactions, becoming a precursor of contemporary art. Number 2. Saturn Devouring His Son, from the Black Paintings. From the year 1819 to the year 1823. Among Francisco de Goya's most striking works, Saturn Devouring His Son stands out as a brutal testament to the painter's inner demons and the political and social climate of the 19th century. Created as part of the black paintings that decorated the walls of his home, this work depicts a mythological scene with a visceral intensity that transcends its original subject. The painting shows the god Saturn in the act of devouring one of his children, with an expression of terror and madness that reflects absolute despair. Goya uses a somber and expressionist style, with a dark color palette and chaotic brushstrokes that accentuate the violence of the scene. The disproportionate anatomy and the empty gaze of the god contribute to creating a nightmarish atmosphere. This work is interpreted as an allegory of power struggles, the passage of time and the horrors of war, recurring themes in Goya's work. In the context of the Napoleonic Wars and political turmoil in Spain, Saturn Devouring His Son can be seen as a commentary on humanity's self-destruction and the insatiable thirst for power that leads to ruin. A fascinating fact is that Goya never planned to exhibit these paintings. They were a private act, which gives them an emotional authenticity that resonates deeply with the viewer. Number 1. On May 3, 1808 in Madrid, the shootings of May 3, 1814. Considered one of the undisputed masterpieces of art history, Francisco de Goya's The 3rd of May 1808 in Madrid captures the tragedy and heroism of a pivotal moment in the Spanish resistance against Napoleonic occupation. Painted in 1814, this monumental work commemorates the massacre of Spanish patriots at the hands of French troops and is notable for its ability to evoke an immediate emotional response. The center of the composition is occupied by an illuminated figure, whose arms are outstretched, evoking Christological images, becoming a symbol of sacrifice and redemption. Around him, Goya constructs a heartbreaking scene with anonymous soldiers representing the implacable machinery of war, while the fallen victims and their expressions of terror reflect human fragility in the face of violence. Goya's technique is masterful. Dramatic lighting, expressive brushstrokes, and color contrasts reinforce the visual and emotional impact of the work. This revolutionary approach would influence later artists such as Manet and Picasso, marking a turning point in Western art by prioritizing emotion and narrative over academic perfection. One detail that underlines the genius of this painting is the absence of conventional heroism. Instead of glorifying war, Goya shows its brutality, inviting the viewer to reflect on the consequences of human conflict. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Give it a like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with your friends and family.